Welcome back to another episode of the Optional Boss Podcast. I'm Josh, with Tyler as always.
This is the first time doing a sequel. It's like the Toy Story 2 of our podcast.
You know what? I've never actually seen Toy Story 2, so I can't make that comparison.
The general census is better. I'm gonna say that this is gonna be better. Not that it was banned before, but everything's exciting when it gets Mega Man X2. Very exciting game. Even if it wasn't better, some people think they're like, "Hello and welcome, everybody."
When they play Mega Man 2, that's what they think.
Typically, they think this is the one I'm gonna remember.
Well, for me, I always dive into nostalgia, and the first one is being the only one that I know. It kind of is in line with this topic, where we are continuing on our conversation. This is a part 2, as we said, of our mini console kind of overviews, kind of thoughts and look-ats, if you will.
You know, it's funny, on the note of remembering, you know what we didn't remember?
Yeah, so something that we should get into, in case anyone is yelling at us, is we forgot a NES game that was popular back in the day.
Well, I wouldn't know.
And Tyler, I'm going to leave it to you to actually say which one it was, because you were guiding the NES discussion.
Yeah, so it was Bubble Bobble by Taito, which is another one of those more like pretty straight arcade to home conversions. But it's very strange that I managed to neglect that when going over the games, because it is one before we started recording that I specifically booted up because I wasn't sure if it was the, how would I describe it? More platforming based kind of arcade game. I had to make sure it wasn't Bust a Move, which is like where you shoot the balls at the other colored balls, the puzzle kind of game. And, somehow it just completely left my mind. But as for, I guess, making up for it, sure, it got forgotten. It can hang out with the other guys, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I could see it on there. Like, from my understanding, I never had it as a kid or anything, but from my understanding it was pretty popular back in the day. So, yeah, there you go.
It seems like a solid 2-player kind of arcade game, so...
Yeah.
But that wraps up the NES. But what are we diving into today? We had 2 remaining, if I'm not mistaken, that we were going to look at.
This is true, but to start off, we are going to dive into our fantastic intro, where we see what's going on. So what have you been up to?
More Monster Hunter. I did beat Ender Lilies, and I don't know if I had beaten it prior or not. I think I had, sort of, but not completed it the last time we discussed it. But, I finished it off. Without going into too many details, it scratches the standard Metroidvania itch. It is very pretty, and the music is wonderful. So, it's I'm not gonna go on and on about it, but it's just... a general, if you're interested in a new Metroidvania, I would recommend it. But that would be, other than that, fill in the void with just hunting more monsters, waiting to see the releases that are on the horizon. How about yourself?
Well, maybe once I finally get to it, it might show up in a mini indie review.
Mindy's The Revengeance.
Damn it, I hate that name. It works too good to be that bad.
Branding.
So for myself, I took a bit of a break from Loop Hero and it dove into some Mega Man. So I finally completed Mega Man 6 and Mega Man 7 on the Mega Man Legacy Collection for Nintendo Switch.
So you've just been moving chronologically up the ladder, right? You haven't been bouncing around with the titles. You're trying to give it the full beginning to end treatment, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I started with 1 a while ago, and I'm kind of working my way through, if I can count.
It is an exciting and sometimes harrowing journey. But 6 and 7, that's an interesting spot to play both at once, because you kind of have an end and a beginning of an era. So I would imagine it was a little bit jarring.
It was a little jarring, and I was kind of hoping that it would be something in line with how Mega Man X plays, because I've played Mega Man X since I was a kid, and 7 was just very different. It was very unique.
That is one way to put it. I have a lot of experience with the entire franchise, but from my childhood specifically, that and the Mega Man X series for the Super Nintendo would have been what I rented countless times. And I never really thought it was they feel very different, yeah, but they kind of have their own place when you look at them for the product that they are, right? Although it is kind of weird that Mega Man 7 almost feels like a step back if you're more experienced with Mega Man X. And it is kind of hard to get into that feel that this is a different product when it does kind of feel so similar at the same time.
Very much so. It's like you can see the similarities, but it feels very different.
Plus that Wily fight.
Oh, I hate that Wily fight. That I can't move that fast.
I was very, very excited to find out how that was going to go, and it sounds like it went about how it should have.
Yeah, it didn't help that there was no mention of a shop that I could go to on the Robot Master screen.
So I very vividly remember as a child playing that game so many times, and I mean, a big part of it being rental, so I would typically just get the cartridge itself, not with the manual. So one day I just hitting buttons on the main screen, and it takes me to this entirely different screen, and there's a shop, and it blew my mind.
Yeah, they should have put a little hit select to see shop or something. You're just collecting these bolts through the entire game, and you're like, what are they for? An arbitrary score? Which is, I mean, back in those days, yeah, that kind of was a thing.
It's a throwback to Mega Man 1 with the arbitrary score.
Yeah, pretty much.
Not currency, no, never. Who's Otto?
No.
Yeah.
Oh, that guy from the opening cutscene.
Yes, he is. I mean, they do establish it from the start, so he just feels like one of the gang. But I mean, your next step in the journey of Mega Man does a pretty good segue as to what we're going to be discussing.
It kind of does. So, like Tyler started off the top, is we have 2 mini consoles left, being a part 2 and all that, and we are going to start off with the PlayStation Classic.
It's like the Coca-Cola Classic, where it's not as good as you thought it would be.
Yeah.
Oh.
So, I think you're thinking of New Coke. Because they went from Coca-Cola to New Coke back to Coca-Cola Classic.
I've always known it as the one, and it's not. I'm not as nostalgic for it. That's for sure.
Well, all I know is I don't drink Sody Pop.
That.
That threw you for a loop now, didn't it?
Sure did. It really did. Getting back onto the non-carbonated discussion.
On this poor excuse of a mini console. This thing upset me so much. I have a lot of nostalgia for the PlayStation. This upset me.
So it was kind of interesting that when they announced it, of course, it felt very bandwagonish. At this point, I believe the Super Nintendo Mini, if it hadn't come out yet, it was like on the horizon. Basically, mini consoles were just kind of the topic of the town at this point. And yeah, it was very exciting to know that there was a PS1 version of this thing coming. And just as more news started coming out, it sounded less and less appealing, which is why I got mine for a bargain.
Yeah, because it was pretty pricey when it came out. Like, just looking at my guide here, it was $130 Canadian when it came out.
Really?
Yeah.
That is nowhere near what I paid for it.
No.
And I bought it like at retail.
Yeah, because they marked them right down almost immediately, not quite, like maybe a month or two
into
their life cycle, because they just weren't selling. And a big part of it is because, and this is what frustrates me the most, is because Sony's been on top of their game, on top of the game, and they just dropped the ball. It's like you said, they were bandwagoning to get this thing out and just play on nostalgia, but they have no idea how to play on nostalgia like Nintendo does.
I will say, though, the actual, if you're talking about just the novelty of the small console itself, I do actually quite like the PlayStation Classic, just because, like, that power button's got a nice bit of click to it. It even has the idle light while it's plugged in. It goes from orange to green. It does have a little bit of charm, but it's also missing a lot of things that it should really have.
Everything about it is great until you turn it on.
It's kind of a monkey's paw of a mini console, where, like, you got your wish, but...
Yeah. No, I said everything about it is great till you turn it on. That's actually something that's not great about it, is it didn't even come with a power adapter.
Yeah, it is charming when it's on, if you could get it on, that is for sure.
Yeah. And you needed a proper power adapter, because it wouldn't just power off like the NES and SNES Mini. You could plug it into the USB port on like a TV or something and it would work fine. This, you needed its own like power brick properly. Like, it's still a USB adapter, but
I remember this. It
Yeah.
won't, I mean, it's not hard to find a compatible one by any means, but the fact that, it won't work just off of any regular USB plug-in power source, I'm not about to actually get into the specs, but a decent enough USB block for it to actually function. Kind of sad that that's missing out of the gate.
It is. And I believe, now don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure that it only came with one controller as well.
I believe it also only came with one controller, and what a unfortunate controller to come with. Now, before I start to complain about it, I will say it does feel nice. It does feel like a pretty standard Gen 1 PlayStation controller, and big strong emphasis on that Gen 1, because where are my sticks?
The fact that it didn't even have analog sticks baffles me, because a lot of those games, that was the transition period. Like, they went out of their way to make the DualShock their prize-winning controller line, and they didn't even incorporate it in, which I will give them the benefit of the doubt and just say, okay, it's because it is the classic console. Give them the classic, the ones that it originally came with, but even later on models of the PlayStation 1 came with DualShock.
Well, and that's kind of why I think it's a bit of a strange move, because, I can agree with you where it's like, we want to preserve that, like, original nostalgic style, right? But it's not particularly reflected in the releases, nor is it, like you said, the Sony kind of put themselves on the map with the DualShock controller, because if you look at the regular launch PS1 controller, it's just a very ugly, sad-looking Super Nintendo controller with extra shoulder buttons.
I wouldn't even say it's sad, but it definitely looks naked in comparison to what we think back on.
That's what I mean when I say sad. Like, it's just not what it should be, right?
Yeah, it's definitely lackluster.
Yeah, it's not a horrible controller to use by any means. It does feel very different than the Super Nintendo controller, obviously, but you can tell, like, that was kind of the archetype for controller design, so...
It's a nice enough controller, but it still baffles me that there was no DualShock, or the two analog sticks.
And the lack of DualShock just really limits the availability of, like, some of the most quality experiences on the PlayStation 1.
So we're going to get into the games here soon, but without a DualShock, when I think, like, the original PlayStation, for whatever reason, maybe I'm off base here, but I think Ep.6.
See, I don't know when Ep.6 was released, but I know that is one of those. Like, you could almost look at how they built Ep.6, like how they built a lot of Nintendo DS games to incorporate the touchscreen, right? Like, the new thing was the focus of the gameplay.
Well, a lot of games for the PlayStation 1, you could use whatever felt right to you. You could use the analog stick, or you could use the D-pad. Ep.6, you had to use the analog sticks.
That's just it. It is designed for the tech that's available. It's be very, very upsetting for the people who didn't get them. But I feel like the DualShock controllers weren't really hard to come across. Like, my memories of the PS1, I didn't have one, but, I knew cousins, friends, what have you, that did. And they all had DualShocks, so I don't know if they were ever, if they ever came stock with later releases of the PS1 or what.
Yes, they did.
Well, that
yes,
because
when I got mine, it came with the DualShock controller, And I want to say that it came with 2 out of the box.
That would be...
I could be wrong on that too.
That would be a nice inclusion, that's for sure.
We're going back a while ago now.
Well, we all have memories of getting our first console, but do we have memories of, like, the receiving of it? Sometimes.
All I know is it was Christmas, and I was very excited.
That'll definitely make for a wonderful holiday season.
Absolutely. Give me a reason not to talk to family.
Yeah, I'm just going to take this thing, plug it in, and no, you don't understand what it is.
So, one thing that we didn't get into with the NES and SNES, and maybe we'll touch on it after the episode, we didn't talk about like the interface or anything. The charm the package is wrapped around, if you will.
With the NES and the Super Nintendo, they're both very similar in their available features. And it doesn't give you a great deal, but it gives you enough. Because it's not trying to be like a full emulation powerhouse of an experience, right? You get a couple different filters, and you get, what is it? I want to say 4 save slots per game.
Yep, you have 4 save slots, save states, if you will.
Yeah.
Per game.
So that's enough to, like, for what it is, right? Because you can very much acknowledge, like, this is not going to be most, if anyone's, primary way of playing these games. It's ways to play these games, but, like, no one's getting the SNES Classic and being, like, that's their dedicated home console. It is genuinely a novelty. So I think for, like, something like that, it didn't need to go super hard on the features, right? It's enough.
No, but with the NES and the SNES, they definitely had their charm with it, with the cute little background music that was in the bit era that the console represented, and just a simple but nice background to stare at as you can scroll through each game and kind of find out what you want to play. So, not much, but it was simplistic and looked nice and had a lot of charm. It was filled to the brim with charm.
I like the interface. Yeah, it's simple, it's understandable, it gives you enough information to go off of, and it also really evokes a lot of those feelings of like the 3DS home screen or maybe even the Wii U. Like, it kind of has that same kind of design structure of that era of Nintendo, right?
Everything's in a box.
Everything is in a nice little box, yeah. And I'm not too picky as long as things aren't so rough, and like I'd say the emulation quality is more than passable. It plays nice. Actually, oddly enough, one of my favorite features about it is, or at least on the Super Nintendo Classic, is while you leave it idling, if you have any of the games that you previously played, it'll give you a nice like 10-20 second trailer of your actual gameplay, which I thought is a really cute little detail.
Yes, it will play back your save state. Which is, I remember when I first saw that I was just kind of taken back. It's like, it's something so simple, but it's so Nintendo.
It gives me those feelings of like, when you would walk into like an EB or something like that, and they're just like, TV, it's got no noise to it, but it's just showing quick little clips of gameplay trailers and whatnot. It's almost like that, but you did it.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. And as for the NES Classic, I don't think it does the same, but it almost has like a Nintendo-themed Windows 95 wallpaper. Or like screensaver, and it just like, just random GIFs or JPEGs of the images from the games. But it's still charming.
They're filled to the brim with that classic Nintendo charm.
And then we get to PlayStation, and winter comes.
Not quite. You turn on the system, and it gives you just a punch in the face of that nostalgic PlayStation load-up chime.
And I will say they did that they couldn't have done better.
No, if they didn't do that, I mean, yeah, sure, it takes a couple seconds, whatever. That is the nostalgia that these products are supposed to be about, is that kind of thing. Just something that slaps you in the face with the nostalgia. Because like you said, you're not getting these consoles as a home console. You're getting it because the nostalgia. The sure, a little bit gimmicky, but it's nostalgia.
And nothing says PlayStation like that opening boot up sound. It's saying
it's so
hello.
good. It's so good.
Yeah.
It just every time I hear that, it just takes me back to.
But
I don't know.
Then they had to, and this is one of those things where it's like authenticity can kind of backfire a bit because they're
crash
home
into
screen.
a fucking wall.
It's so I always remember whenever I would boot up my PS1 with just the memory card in it, and it's just the most eerily silent, blocky. Like it almost looks like, I don't know, the backgrounds that they would use if you were watching something like Nickelodeon, and it's like, we'll be right back, and it's just all these weird neon colors for the sake of being neon colors. But it also looks like weird fragmented data to, as a kid in the 90s, is just like, it's falling apart.
It was very strange.
It was just so quiet and soulless.
Like just, so the background has that it's just like almost a straight purple with a bit of gradient toward black on the edges, right? And then all the games are listed in a circle. And you spin through them and it does a little click, 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 click. The presentation is not ideal.
I get it, but they really could have spiced it up. At least put me, get a little jingle in the background or something.
Yeah. Even if it faded in and out of the themes to the games that they had on the list. Just something, not just this eerie quiet, you don't even know if the thing's on if you couldn't see it.
It just feels very hollow, yeah.
It feels half-assed.
Yeah. Now, I can't remember, but it has, if I'm not mistaken, the same amount of games as the SNES Mini?
Has 20 games. So essentially, yes. I think the SNES Mini had 21.
You might be right. We just discussed this. I should know this, but
that was last week's problem.
They're relatively the same variety of selection, but the variety itself is
questionable.
I'll let you take the charge on going through this here smorgasbord of games for the original PlayStation.
Yes. So once again, I had them in alphabetical order. And something else that I will bring up quick is some of the games were actually the PAL version and some were the NTSC. And where, if you don't know what that means, is some run at was it 50 hertz? Or
it's
50
less
FPS?
than us, I know that.
Yeah, because we're 60. So some of the games had really sluggish performance.
So back then, your standard FPS was, I think, around 30, right? That was kind of the norm, as where
30 and 60 depending on the game.
Yeah, but they would be clocking a good 24 to R30. So it's it's noticeable.
It doesn't sound like much, but it certainly is noticeable. And checking out some of these games, which they chose PAL versions to put on, it's baffling considering we're all at 60 hertz now with new TVs and all that kind of stuff. We aren't running CRTs. It's not based on the power going into the tube, if you will. So it's very questionable.
Well, and
so I'm going to be announcing which games are PAL and which games aren't.
Well, and that's the confusing thing, right? Is it's not all or none. It's just a random selection that they decided to go with those versions.
It's a mix, and it makes no sense to have any of these PAL versions on here. Period. It baffles me.
Well, I'm glad you have those identified because, yeah, I've actually been curious as to which ones were.
A lot of the decisions that were made on this, and this is why I call it such a half-ass thing from a company that seems to hit everything it does out of the park with newer consoles. But, so to start off, we have Battle Arena Toshinden. And it is a PAL game.
Oh, not a fighting game? That's rough.
Yeah.
So, do you know much about this one? Because I know I've heard of it. I know I've never played it before, but it seems a lot like your very early 3D fighters, not unlike, things like Tekken, Virtua Fighter, stuff like that.
So, truth be told, when it comes to fighting games, like I never got into Street Fighter, I never got into Mortal Kombat. Like fighters are just not my jam. So when I saw it was a fighting game, I just backed away. The most I did play on PlayStation was Bloody Roar or Soul Calibur on the GameCube.
Ooh.
And they were just demos.
Those are fun.
That I played, so.
And not to say that this isn't fun, but from what I've seen of this game, if it's the one I'm recalling, it looks a lot like it would be an early prototype of Soul Calibur, but not. I don't know. It has a lot of early 3D fighting game jank, because I think that's kind of why it's here, is because it was released really early in the PlayStation lifespan.
Probably. I'm out of a guess, anyways. And now, I'm no expert by any means. I'm just some idiot talking away. I know a lot of game names. This is not one I've actually heard of until I got my Sony PlayStation Classic.
Well, it's not really one that seems to come up much.
No. So, questionable, yeah. I don't know.
I can't vouch for this game being here. That would be my thoughts on it.
And this is probably going to be a repeating statement from both of us, honestly.
Could be interesting.
So next game is Cool Borders 2, the PAL version.
Well, that's unfortunate that it's also a PAL version, but I'm going to say this is kind of one of those games, even though it's not like as, it's not your Marios or anything like that when it comes to its actual branding. This is one of those things that when I think PlayStation, I think games like this.
Yep. I mean, PlayStation versus the N64, a lot of the PlayStation games were much better versions when it came to sports. The N64 didn't do proper sports simulation games very well. Not that this is a simulation, but now with that said, back in the day, I played a literal shitload of Cool Borders 2.
I think you are not alone on that. Now, again, didn't grow up with the PlayStation, but it is one of those kind of staple titles that I remember a lot of people having, right?
Yes, I knew more people with Cool Borders 3 than Cool Borders 2.
Interesting.
But I know Cool Borders 2, though, you can unlock an alien.
But what I think is interesting about Cool Borders 2, and now I could kind of see the defense here, but the game that makes me think PlayStation more, which is not here, is one of the Tony Hawk games.
Yes.
Probably 2 to be specific, but at the same time, and now if I had to guess, it was probably just, a big old headache of license or something, but if that wasn't the case, it would be something I would say belongs here more than Cool Borders, but that doesn't mean I don't think Cool Borders belongs here.
I think Tony Hawk, either 1 or 2, was much more noticeable than Cool Borders would be. They're both pretty popular, but Tony Hawk beat it in spades.
Everyone had Tony Hawk 1 or 2.
So next game is Destruction Derby, which is also a PAL version.
So when I was going through the library of this for this topic here, it's hilarious how it's the most generic game or generic name for a game, and I think because of that, it had just completely slipped my mind that a game called Destruction Derby existed for the PlayStation 1.
Yeah.
I know nothing about it. Now, that said, it feels very PlayStation. PlayStation was definitely the more, car and driving game-oriented console of the time. But, I don't know. I might have to look into it just because I'm so baffled by its existence. But, I'm not about to say it's one of those when I think PlayStation games.
No, it sounds like it's a PlayStation game, but it doesn't... I don't associate it with it being a PlayStation game, if that makes sense.
Like I said, didn't even know it existed. So, yeah, gonna have to check it out sometime, though, solely on the curiosity of that.
I know I've played it, but I can't tell you much about it.
I feel like it won't be good.
Especially nowadays.
Just, no analog sticks.
Oh yeah,
no, it's...
I wasn't even thinking of that.
Yeah, so you're basically... I think if I had to guess how it would control, it would be one of those... Kind of like, your classic Mario Karts and whatnot, where you'd have, I guess triangle. No, triangles. I don't know. A PlayStation button makes you accelerate, and then you have the D-pad to control. Maybe the shoulder buttons are for sharper turns or something. And that like really rough, wide half-angle swing of the camera that used to happen with the shoulder buttons.
Yes.
Oh God, just it hurts to think about.
Like the game I could think of that with that I did play was Driver or Driver 2.
Yep. Which
You are the wheel man.
Where is Driver?
Yeah, again, this list is very questionable.
That is definitely a game that, like, when I think PlayStation, I think the Driver franchise. It's almost exclusive to the PS1. I know they made more beyond it, but it was never as popular as it was then.
No, its life blood literally started and died with the PlayStation 1.
Yeah, and they cranked 3 of them out, I'm pretty sure. And it was doing
Was there
Grand
3?
Theft Auto before the 3D Grand Theft Autos.
Yeah, just without the running around.
I
recall.
believe you could, from 2 or 3, you could actually get out and steal people's cars.
Okay.
Yeah. It was like, just you would only get the map that you're driving, and it's not like you can really go into buildings and stuff like that, but like it feels like half of a Grand Theft Auto game. It's kind of interesting.
Almost like it would be the inspiration for it.
If it weren't for the fact that it was already kind of existing on the side, yeah, you could say it would feel like that, yeah.
Yeah. So, next game. And this is one I will fully agree that it should be on here. It's Final Fantasy VII.
I think that's, like, pretty much the reason to own this.
Yeah, certainly one of them.
Oh,
and
is this one a PAL version?
No.
Oh, thank goodness.
But, yeah, it should absolutely be on here. Like, this I would argue, is what put PlayStation on the map.
Put Squaresoft
I'm so
on
excited.
the map.
I'm tripping over my words here.
Yeah, no, it is, and not only that, it is pretty much the breakout RPG hit of all time, which solidified the genre as something to be taken more seriously, right? It, for so many reasons, belongs here, and it's kind of one of the things that gives me a reason to actually defend this mini console, is even though the rest of the library seems like a big miss at times, because it has this, it almost justifies everything. And it's a game that can be comfortably played without the analog sticks.
Yes. I won't say that it is the lifeblood of the console, though. It is probably the best game on here, but
It's a system seller, for sure.
yeah.
Yeah.
Literally like it was back in the day. That's where the nostalgia lies.
I don't think we have to go too into Final Fantasy VII without going into Final Fantasy VII, which I'm pretty sure we're gonna do at one point in our career here.
Oh, probably.
Yeah.
Now, one thing, this is the first game that uses multi-discs, and the PlayStation Classic does have a open button. So when it was time to actually change the discs on the Classic, you had to hit the open button and it would bring up the disc menu.
Wait, that's a thing?
Yeah.
That's really cool. It's so dumb.
It is. It's a bit of nostalgic charm to
I
it.
wonder if that means... So I'm going to kind of, like... I'm sure this is something we were going to touch on later, but I'm just going to bring it up now just because I'm curious about it. If you are emulating on... Because this is really why people are loving this console, right? If you were to emulate something with multiple discs on it, would it still make you do that?
Yes.
That's so cool.
As someone who got his PlayStation Classic to tinker under the hood with, yeah, that's exactly what you do.
I like that. That's charming.
It is.
Yeah.
Silly, sure, but charming.
Yeah. I don't think that's the only multi-disc game on the console, is it?
I don't know.
From what I'm looking at, it might be... I don't know. I'll bring up if I think it's a multi-disc when we get to it. But,
Yeah.
what...
So Final Fantasy VII definitely belongs on here.
Oh, undoubtedly.
Next up is the Grand Theft Auto 1.
Yes.
Which is a PAL version.
Yes, this belongs here for so many reasons.
Yes.
It's hard to defend. Like, it's a rough game to go back and play now, for sure. But it's still when you can start getting into it, classic top-down Grand Theft Auto is a whole different beast, and I think it's so much fun.
If anything, like, Grand Theft Auto is so popular nowadays that it's worth looking into where it got started. And it's just that silly right over top your character view. You can go grab cars. I never did very good in it, but I always enjoyed my time with it. It was a good time.
It's hilariously arcadey, and it's just super fun to play. Like, when you can actually get down with the controls, it is a lot of fun to zip through those streets. I personally have a lot more fondness for Grand Theft Auto 2. It's a weird game if you've never played it, but it's still that same top-down formula, right?
Yep.
But yeah, I can safely say the first Grand Theft Auto belongs here just because of what it is. More people need to actually give it a shot.
A proper try.
Yeah.
Anyways. Next up is Intelligent Cube.
This is a weird choice.
It is a kind of like auto-scrolling puzzle game.
How so?
Is it not?
No, so Intelligent Cube, I think you're thinking of Ribby Rabby.
I'm not, because how could I forget that one?
Yeah.
But I've never actually played Intelligent Cube. I'm just going off what I can envision in my head.
Okay, so the way I can describe Intelligent Cube is you have, like, a floor is like a 4 by, 70 tile grid, right? And you're trying to get from one end to the other.
Yep.
And while you're doing so, there's like this giant cube that's rolling towards you, and it'll have somewhere in an opening. So like when it comes at you, you have to kind of like stand in this perfect spot so you don't get crushed.
Yes.
Yeah. It's like an odd kind of reactionary puzzle game, right?
Yep.
Don't care.
Yeah, it's very minimalistic.
If I'm not mistaken, it's a weird game. Like, there's just, like, one of those just weird for the sake of weird. Almost think like, like GLaDOS.
Yep.
Yeah, so I don't know, man. You could have put Pepsi Man here and that'd be like the same, I'd have the same feeling about it. It's sure.
So it was critically acclaimed in Japan. So that is one thing I can think of as to why it's on here. It's also known as Kirushi in Europe.
Well, it's kind of like
wondering.
I've seen like game show versions that are similar to this. So it is an interesting premise, but do I think Intelligent Cube when I think PlayStation? No. No, I think more so even I had like this random Tetris game for PlayStation 1, and it was like you were helping this archaeologist. I can't remember what it was called, but even that seems more PlayStation to me than Intelligent Cube if you want to scratch that puzzle itch.
Yeah, I don't think it was very popular in North America anyways. I can't speak for Europe, of course. But they have two different lists here, one for Japan and one for North America and Europe and stuff.
Yeah.
So why is this not just on the Japan version? We got something else.
Did Japan get this?
Yes.
Okay, so it would be even weirder if only we got it.
It would be very weird.
But yeah, that's an overall meh to no in my mind.
Yeah, I don't have much to say on it. I've seen it. I've never actually played it.
This is probably where I should plug the very obvious disclaimer that these are opinions, and opinions are something that we can express without any kind of concern. These are not definitive reviews.
Oh, I feel like we should have said that when you started bashing Final Fantasy X.
Probably.
Next up is Jumping Flash, which is also a PAL version.
I haven't... that's a shame. I haven't played it. I think it's kind of neat. I think this is another one... if I'm not mistaken, this is even like a big box release PlayStation game if it goes back that far. And it's kind of like the Mario 64 of the PlayStation. It's clearly not as well known, but I like how it's trying so hard to be a 3D platformer before people really knew how to, right?
Yeah, and the fact that it's first person is weird.
But it's also not that weird when you think about like how PC games were handling first person platforming, right? Like think about like Unreal and stuff like that.
Sure. But how many times did you see that kind of stuff on a console?
Oh, never. But that's why it's so interesting to see, like, that was kind of like, how do we do this? Well, maybe if we kind of look at what other people are doing, we could try. Like, I don't know if that's what they did, clearly, but that's just how it feels.
Very much so. It's a strange one. I haven't actually played this one either. And there's a few of these I should really jump on and just start. I feel like some of these I just hate because they're actually on the system and I don't think of them when I think PlayStation.
It's kind of hard. It's like looking in the fridge and there's nothing in there you want to eat.
Exactly. I haven't lowered my standards enough to play Jumping Flash.
And you're not hungry enough for Final Fantasy VII.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think it's like Jumping Flash is another one, like, as opposed to Destruction Derby, where I wanted to look at it just out of sheer morbid curiosity. I think Jumping Flash is something that I'd want to check out, like, as almost just an evolutionary curiosity of, 3D platforming. It's an interesting thought to think all I am doing in this game is jumping and looking at my feet.
With a D-pad.
With a D-pad, yes. But again, because it's like a kind of an older title and like it fits that evolutionary path of gaming, sure, I think that it's okay being here.
Yeah, let's go for it. It's certainly not PlayStation when I think of PlayStation, but
no. But
yeah,
sure,
it's a thing.
To be fair though, I think Jumping Flash is an in-house Sony game.
Is it?
I think so.
Exact and Ultra.
Sure.
Are the developers.
And I would know them from...
I don't know.
Uh-oh.
They don't even have a wiki link.
But I think it was released under Sony Interactive Studios or something like that.
Yes,
yeah.
It was published by them, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that probably gave it a little bit more of a push as well.
Probably. Just less licensing that they had to pay for.
Yeah, but what we got after that?
A game that I think should be on here.
Oh.
And that is Metal Gear Solid.
Yes, and more yes. Now,
Psycho Mantis.
Oh, the box. I think this is a pretty legendary PS1 game. It's one of the few that I did actually play while I was growing up, and it's surprising that, like, kid me got through it. Now, this was definitely one of those things where you're back in the area of, like, people discussing how to beat games, right? So I definitely knew about the Psycho Mantis thing long before actually doing it. But either way, it's still just a solid experience, right?
Yeah, they had a lot of quirkiness. This was Kojima's kind of breakthrough, if you will.
Well, and the amount of story presentation from something that's not an RPG is actually incredible for its time, right? And the story itself is still pretty good.
Yeah, it's certainly admirable.
So, and this is definitely one of those things when I think, like, legacy PlayStation titles, for sure, Metal Gear Solid belongs here, right? That was the start of a legendary franchise. It wasn't the actual start, but the solid portion of it, you know what I mean.
Yeah, if it wasn't on here, I'd be very disappointed, to be honest.
You should play it.
Because it is one of those games that slap you in the face saying, hey, a PlayStation.
Yeah.
Right? So
we're edgy and cool and adult.
Psycho Mantis.
Psycho Mantis. Metal Gear.
Next up is Mr. Driller.
I think this should be here just because I like Mr. Driller. But also, I think it scratches. It's an interesting puzzle game, right? Like they're obviously not getting Tetris, but it's more Tetris-esque than like your intelligent cube. If you want to scratch that puzzle itch. Oh, I just realized what else is on here too. Oh. Okay, I have an issue already. I like Mr. Driller. One that can come up later, or one that pertains to Mr. Driller? It doesn't pertain to Mr. Driller. It pertains to like the selection. We've already gotten this far, and it's feeling a little genre bloated.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a shame. But as for the game itself, Mr. Driller, it's fun, it's arcadey, but a little bit puzzly, and just very charming. I think it belongs here.
Yeah, I got no problem with it. I don't think it screams PlayStation, but at the same time, it's something I think before I think Intelligent Cube or Jumping Flash.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. Yeah, Mr. Driller is a little harder to identify as PlayStation because he's kind of been everywhere else. I don't look at it as like its origins being here specifically, but
Especially nowadays, right?
yeah, but as something on the console itself to kind of scratch that arcadey puzzle itch for sure.
So next up is one I think deserves to be on here. Oddworld Abe's Odyssey,
So I agree.
which is a PAL version.
I think that's a game where, I don't know, because I haven't actually played it. If I'm not mistaken, it's got that very precise cinematic style platforming, kind of like the original Prince of Persia, stuff like that.
Yep.
And doesn't it... Have you played it before?
I have not. It is something that is actually on my backlog.
I feel like it had a lot of Lemmings-esque sort of, like you're trying to help other people get to safety and stuff.
Yep.
It's a weird one, and I think it's one of those games that's been so memorable just because it was so weird.
So from my understanding is going into it nowadays can be frustrating, but it's one of those frustrations that you can't put down. That's the way it's being described recently.
Yeah, I don't know. I've always found that style of gameplay particularly frustrating. The deliberate try, die, try again kind of stuff. It tests more of your memorization skills than your actual like gameplay skills, right? Now again, I haven't played it. I don't know how much of this game is actually reactionary and all that, but it's never really appealed to me, but I can't deny the legacy that the Oddworld series has.
No, and it's certainly something I think of PlayStation when I think of it.
Yeah, so I think it belongs here, even if I feel it's not for me. And again, with these consoles, they're not all gonna be my thing, but so long as I can find merit to it being here.
Next up is R4 Ridge Racer Type 4.
Yes, and I can't really compare it to much else, but I feel like the PlayStation needs at least one more simulation-esque racing game, because this was the console that you went to for that, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if something would be a better fit, like a Need for Speed or a Gran Turismo or something. Gran Turismo, I think, is more PlayStation in general, but it just needed something to fill that genre, and so again, I'm not too knowledgeable on them, so I can't really say if R4 is the peak or even if very good, but just as a representation, yes, very much so.
Yeah, I think it works on here just as a racing game. Personally, I don't care for that style of racing game, but yeah. And I think where we had Destruction Derby before, I think that's more of a battle mode. I could be wrong. I'm not an expert on that.
If it's not, then they picked the wrong title.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Next up, I'm gonna agree, except they should have had number 2, and that is Rayman.
I think, yes, Rayman is a PlayStation character. Like, he's not exclusively, like a lot of these things, but that is definitely a series that I think of the PlayStation when I think of its origins. He
started on the PlayStation, right? He kind of got his up and coming on PlayStation.
I know Rayman 2 was considered to be the better game and maybe even more of the breakout hit, but I think Rayman 1 should be here just because if I'm looking at the list, it's really one of the only classic sprite-based kind of platformer-esque games which are arguably the games that aged the best.
Yep.
And they were, again, this is more making it personal, but if I wanted to play a PlayStation game, I wanted to play those more enhanced 32-bit style games that just looked like they were beefed up Super Nintendo games, right?
Yeah, I could definitely see that.
Things like the Mega Man games, Legend of Mana, that all kind of retained that more classic but powerful art style. So the fact that Rayman is the only representation for the most part makes me sad, but that is why I think it should be here versus the second one.
You know what would have been a better choice?
A lot of things.
Symphony of the Night.
Oh, that's another one of those. Why the heck isn't it here? And it's even more confusing because Metal Gear Solid is here.
Yes.
So
It's not like they weren't talking to Konami or anything, but
and especially too, because I know the Castlevania franchise, it's been like a little bit shaky. What with Koji Igarashi, I am gonna butcher that name, but the guy who was basically the father of the Metroidvania formula, who made Bloodstain. So I don't know if there would be any kind of issues with that, but I don't see why, considering Metal Gear Solid was Hideo Kojima, which I would think it would be harder to get his stuff.
yeah, especially given their kind of fallback
Yeah, so
between Konami and Hideo.
it just feels really weird, the Symphony of the Night, because that is I think PlayStation, I think that game kind of game.
Yep.
Yeah.
But next up is certainly a game that you think of when you think PlayStation. And that is Resident Evil, the Director's Cut, which is a PAL game.
I think you missed one.
What did I miss?
Did you miss Persona?
No, because it's actually listed under Revelations Persona.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so it's the game after. Gotcha. So Resident Evil Director's Cut. Now, you know significantly more about the original or just Resident Evil in general than I do, but wasn't Director's Cut the one that was bad?
Not necessarily bad. It was the one with the changed music, I believe.
Okay.
So there's a whole story behind that. The original composer was actually losing his hearing, so he had a ghostwriter perform all the music, and then he took credit. And when it was found out, it's technically a licensing issue because he's not the actual composer.
Oh.
So when that music was out, the infamous story of the basement music and stuff like that got shoved in for a director's cut.
Okay.
And I think the director's cut, they also added in a colored cut, FMV at the start, because before it was just black and white.
Yeah, because it was supposed to be like a hokey B movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's just a fair amount of just small little changes all around the game itself.
But
and interesting fact, not really fact, but just something that I caught wind of a couple weeks ago, is someone has gathered most of the actors. So the guy who played Wesker, Chris, and Barry Burton. And he's doing a short film with them.
Oh, neat.
For Resident Evil.
Like
so
licensed as Resident Evil?
No. It is a fanfic Resident Evil.
Oh, okay.
With the original actors from that cutscene.
That is still really cool, though.
That is really cool. They couldn't get a hold of the person who played Jill, apparently. But yeah, still really neat, because they got the original Wesker, the original Chris, and the original Barry.
That is kind of neat. But back on the...
It's not something you see too often. But yeah, it absolutely belongs here.
Well, I was going to say the director's cut isn't, like... The gameplay isn't compromised by any mean. It's just a few little tweaks outside of it.
Yeah, I don't think between Resident Evil Director's Cut, Resident Evil DualShock, which we wouldn't see on here because where's the DualShock, Sony? I don't think it really matters what version's on here. They all are going to play the same. Director's Cut is probably going to be the best, just with the bit more color and some fine tuning and whatnot.
But
where the original, the FMV is the biggest thing, or any of the cutscenes are black and white versus the colored. Little, minor tweaks. Then
you're just getting into cosmetics, right? But I would say, even though it's not a series that I've dabbled into, I think PlayStation when I think the first RE, so.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do I think the PAL version? No.
No, not at all. But I guess I spoiled the next one, didn't I?
Yes. Revelations Persona, the first Persona game.
I think it's cool that this is here. Because, I mean, one more RPG representation. Because when I think PlayStation, I do think it is like the RPG powerhouse, right?
It was really good at sports, its racing, and its RPGs.
Yep. But I know it. Like, I don't really recall anyone ever owning Persona, and I mean that could just be with Atlas in general. They were a much more small print company as it is, and niche as well. But it is kind of cool that even though, like, if people are thinking the Persona series nowadays, it's going to be 3 and beyond. That there is a more accessible way of its kind of more humble, because it's a very different beast.
Yes.
It is more in line, like, it feels like a proper early Shin Megami Tensei spin-off, but it also comes from a time where Shin Megami Tensei didn't even feel like it does now. So...
And I don't think at this time Shin Megami Tensei was even over in North America.
Not mainline, anyway. I know. Yeah, I think this is actually the very first Shin Megami Tensei property to come here outside of, and this is a bit of a stretch, but I want to say, like, there was Last Bible for the Game Boy Color, which no one's looking at that as, like, that's a spin-off of a spin-off, so.
Yeah. You think Atlas, you're thinking more Persona nowadays, unfortunately, as opposed to the Shin Megami Tensei.
But I still think it's cool. Like, they dug up something that's more popular now than it was then and kind of gave it some representation. So, yeah, I think it belongs here.
It's neat.
Yeah, it's neat, just like the potato.
It's neat.
Yeah. All right, what's after that?
Next is Super Puzzle Fighter 2 Turbo.
See, this is what I'm talking about overbloated.
Yes.
This, like, okay, I don't know. I think it's like,
I know nothing on this.
As far
is it
as
a puzzle game or is it a fighter?
It's a puzzle game, yeah. And I want to say it's along the lines of like a Bejeweled, like a match 3 kind of puzzle game. I'm not 100%. But and I think the gameplay works as you're incorporating like the combos that you actually like get, like your chains of different blocks and all that end up becoming like fighting combos. I'm not sure. I know it's really beloved by the people who like it, but I don't know why this is on here.
Yeah, we already have Mr. Driller.
Yeah, and Cube. Cube is a very different beast compared to the Mr. Driller, but still, like, it feels like we're getting a little bit too puzzly.
For a system that you think of racing, sports, and RPGs, there's a fair amount of puzzle games on here.
Yeah, so, yeah, sure, but no.
Next up.
Oh, if this is what I think it is, yes, 100% yes. And also, where did it go?
I don't know if it's what you think it is, but maybe. Siphon Filter.
That is exactly it.
All right.
Oh, yeah, no, Siphon Filter is definitely a franchise that I think PS1, there was, 3 of them?
3 of them, yeah.
And I think if it's not the second or it's just the third one, but one of them also had 2 discs. But I don't think
the
first
second
one
and
did.
third. The second and third did. The first one just had 1 disc.
Okay, I know that. So something that is very much ingrained in my memory about the PlayStation 1, which is why I'm probably going to get my memories wrong. But there was like a snow-based level that I remember. And also getting rocket launchers. But I'm also worried that I'm mixing this up with GoldenEye 64, but in third person.
I don't remember much of the late game. I know the beginning of the game. I played a crap ton. I was never very good at it, but I played a lot of it. And what other game in this era could you taser someone, hold the taser on until they combust into a big fiery ball?
That was a thing too. I remember now.
Yeah.
So I have a feeling, though I personally feel like this is a special piece of PlayStation history, this is probably one of the more rough playing games to go on this console. If I had to guess, like, I'm thinking it probably uses tank controls and like...
It does.
Oh, Oh yeah, no, this one's probably really hard to go back to, but it does my heart good to see that because what even happened of Siphon Filter? It seemed like a really big deal on the PS1, and then it just went away.
They had a couple PS2 games. I don't, maybe two. It did not do good.
No.
No, I actually have a sealed copy of, I believe it's Siphon Filter Dark Mirror for PS2 in on my shelf actually.
That is a very bizarre. That I would imagine you're
Yeah.
probably going to teach some people something new if they hear about this game today.
It's possible.
Yeah.
Like aside from Siphon Filter 1, 2, and 3, you didn't hear anything. I didn't even know about this till I found it last year, 2 years ago. And it's like, holy crap. And it was sealed. And it was very cheap. For a sealed PS2 game, you would imagine that it would be going for a pretty penny. And this thing was like less than $20.
No.
It's like, ooh, that's bad.
So, yeah, my verdict on Siphon Filter, 100% belongs here. Look, I stole your line.
Yes, you did.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad it's on here, and admittedly, I'm going to go back to it one day, because now as an adult, I want to check out some of the old games that I used to have a lot of fun with. And admittedly, this game was rough even for back in the day. And yes, it uses tank controls, and so does Resident Evil. Resident Evil is nice and slow with its enemies, not people shooting guns at you.
It was more about survival than it was shooting.
Yes.
Yeah.
So next up is Tekken 3, the PAL version.
Oh no. So I don't know Tekken too well. I'm sure I played some of it back when I was a kid, and I like fighting games from more than you from the sound of it, but they've never really been the thing that I like ultimately think of. But I will say, just as a franchise itself, if you have Tekken here, why do you have Battle Arena Toshinden? Or vice versa?
Yes. I mean, Tekken is a much more well-known brand.
And it's
They're both PAL versions, so it's not like one's better than the other in that sense.
Well, in that sense, yeah. But I think as an overall product, Tekken 3 would be the much more reputable game. Tekken, I know, is kind of its own beast when it comes to the fighting game genre. It's got different mechanics and ways of going about it than anything else. But it's still, when you think 3D fighters, you're going to think something like Tekken more than Battle Arena Toshinden.
Yes.
So, yes, but also at a cost is my thought of this. Like, it belongs here, but less so because there's something else that's similar.
Yeah, or more so, and Battle Arena Toshinden shouldn't be here.
Yeah.
Regardless, they're both PAL versions, so a fighter running Sluggy sucks.
Yeah. This is very true.
So where Sluggy might actually help this next game out, which I actually played a lot as a kid, Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six.
I think it's neat to have an old first-person shooter here.
Yes.
It's not really my genre of choice by any means, and I can safely say I don't think I've ever played this, but this gets a solid sure from me just because it's a representation of a genre that would have been done much better on PlayStation 1 as far as memory serves than what would have been available at the time.
Yeah.
So,
I actually played this on PlayStation 1 and PC. I owned it for both. And it's okay. It was rough back in the day. Probably really rough now. That's all I got for it.
I think, yeah, it is
The
what it is.
fall damage was incredible.
Oh, jeez.
You fall off a box and you're dead.
Oh, no. Yeah.
But I want to say that you had like 4 different characters that you could swap between, or maybe 3 total, 2 you could swap to at any time, and then you had to position like your team around.
I don't know. I just recall it being a first-person shooter. Wait.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. This one. Yeah. I think it's something. I can't think of any other first-person shooters for the PlayStation 1. I don't know, maybe the Medal of Honor series existed yet?
They were on the PlayStation, but I don't know.
But, yeah. It gets a yes. Tom, you can be here.
Yep.
Yeah, but
we got two more left.
two more left, eh? One of them is a big yes, and one of them is something else.
One of them I played a little bit, but again, it's more like a little bit, and the other one, nothing. Next up is Twisted Metal.
Yeah, Twisted Metal is definitely a PlayStation game. That just it says PlayStation so strongly.
It does.
Hard to go
and
back to.
I've only dabbled in it, but yeah, it's certainly one of those PlayStation big names back in the day, anyways.
It's combat driving isn't as fun as it used to be in my mind.
No.
I don't know, but that said, I don't think this is a particularly bad game in any way. It's just something that I'm not as big of a fan now as I would have been when I was younger, because, I mean, the appeal of destruction is definitely what it thrived on.
Yep. I think it should have had Twisted Metal 2 instead, but at the same time, any Twisted Metal representation is nice because they've clearly forgotten about that series.
Well, they've tried and failed and tried and failed. And I think it just really comes down to the whole, combat racing's just not as appealing as it used to be, right?
Yep. Next up is Wild Arms.
I played it a little bit, and it's something that I kind of want to spend more time with. It is very much just a classic JRPG. I don't know what it does unique per se, like its specific gimmick, or if it's just going to feel like a Final Fantasy but not. But as far as I'm aware, the Wild Arms games are just quality RPGs. And again, comes back to that whole thought that, like, when I think PlayStation, I think RPGs. Now, having said that, Wild Arms, sure, I've heard of it. Not saying it doesn't belong here, but it definitely doesn't belong here as much as, say, like a Legend of Dragoon.
Yeah, Legend of Dragoon, I think, would be much more appropriate for this, instead of Wild Arms. And, Legend of Dragoon is a Sony name, isn't it?
Yeah. If I'm not mistaken, it is, like, Sony's answer to the JRPG market, right?
So is Wild Arms, actually.
But you can tell with... now, I wouldn't be surprised if Wild Arms came out sooner, because it kind of has that we were designing for the PlayStation before we knew what the PlayStation could do kind of vibe to it. But you can tell with something like Legend of Dragoon, they were going for like that Final Fantasy VII level of production.
Yeah.
And maybe that's what we're shooting for, right?
Legend of Dragoon is another thing that they've just forgotten about.
Well, and it's got like such large fan outcry.
It does. They are begging for a remaster or a remake or something. And you know what? That's actually a game I want to go back to because I remember playing it as a kid, had a lot of fun with it, and its combat is a little more interactive.
It has that kind of delightful Paper Mario style.
Which, based on the first episode of this podcast, interactivity on turn-based battles make them more exciting for me.
Yeah. I remember...
And I know I'm not alone.
I played it when I was younger, and it definitely... It felt good. It had that kind of like we have Final Fantasy VII at home feel, which is not a bad thing. And I only think I got about a disc in, but at the same time, didn't grow up with the PlayStation, right?
Yeah, which is fair enough.
But so
that's, with Wild Arms,
yeah,
it's the funny thing about it is like I've heard it so many times, but all honesty, you know what I thought whenever I heard it?
What's that?
I always thought it was a Sega Genesis game.
Are you thinking of... that's even a Super Nintendo game. I think it's just called Wild Guns. And it's like a...
It might. It just sounds like a Sega game, to be honest.
No, I think there's like 3 or more in the Wild Arms series. Like, it's a pretty long-running franchise as far as I'm aware.
Yeah.
So,
just something about it. I've always thought about it being a Sega game for whatever reason. Like, it just in conversation. If I saw the box art and stuff, yeah, instantly, PlayStation. But just anytime I heard the name, I always got it confused with something on the Sega.
That is.
So I always think Sega.
Very
so
fair.
with that nice, beautiful segue laid out, our next system and last system that we actually plan on talking about is the Sega Genesis Mini. Just the first one. Neither of us have actually dabbled with the second one. And quite honestly, I do not have a whole lot of experience with Sega games. So I'm going to be actually taking a little bit of a backseat here. And Tyler is going to lead us off.
Yeah, I guess, and I mean, well, here's the thing to start with this. There's so many games on the Genesis Mini. It is actually kind of hilarious that when I see how many games they crammed onto this thing, it's almost a callback to the initial competition of the Genesis and the Super Nintendo, where it's like, I think it's actually exactly double the amount of games on the Super Nintendo Mini, if I'm not mistaken.
There's 40 classic Sega games.
Yeah, so approximately double, which is kind of hilarious.
Now, what's even more hilarious is they came out with the Sega Genesis Mini 2.
Yeah.
It has 50.
And I've kind of been looking at it, what's coming out for it and all that stuff. And though I like how it looks like the Model 2, because that is the Genesis I remember from my childhood.
Same here.
You know, like, I'm not even going to bother entertaining the notion of going over what's over the Mini 2 right now. If people want to hear me talk about it, they can let me know. But until then, I think this is enough. And before I even get into this list of games, I'm going to say, like, as much as I think, like, the Genesis Mini kind of knocked it out of the park, like, they got a really solid game selection. I don't know if it has more save states, but it handles the save states really well. It feels pretty good. I'm pretty sure it came with 2 controllers, but it did have kind of one big issue, and this is where, like, the going for too much kind of, like, backfired on them. It's got a lot of games on here that they work with the original controller, but they were made with the 6-button controller in mind. So then if you wanted to play these games properly, you had to look for an external source or buy an official 6-button controller. So there were some things about it that weren't handled as great, and I know they didn't fly off the shelves nearly as well as, like, the Nintendo line of stuff. But
if I'm not incorrect, it came out after the PlayStation Classic, right?
Yeah, it was the last of these to release, and it certainly had a better reputation than the PlayStation Mini.
I think people were a little burned with the PlayStation. They're like, okay, this is enough.
I think, yeah, it was for the people who really were interested in it. Outside of that, though, like, the mini console thing had kind of run its course for the most part. Now, that said, people are still clamoring for more from Nintendo, but, you know, it's like,
you know what? I'm in that party too.
Well,
mainly because how easy it is to tinker with them. Granted.
Yeah. They definitely have their advantages. But yeah, I'm just gonna run over these through pretty quick, and basically just let me know if you have any experience with it. Alex Kidd.
I know it. That's about it.
That's so I know that this was like initially Sega's Mario, and it just really didn't take off. And I've played it, and I don't like it. But sure, it can be here
before
just because
Sonic, of course, right?
Yeah, it's a Sega Kid. That's all right. And then we have Alicia Dragoon, which it's kind of an interesting mix of like a 2D side-scrolling platformer and like a shoot-'em-up. And though I haven't played it, it does seem kind of interesting. So a deep cut, I think it could stay. Altered Beast, you ever play Altered Beast?
I have not.
I don't like it. It's very, very old. You can tell, like, I think this was actually the original pack-in game for the Sega Genesis, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and,
just for that, it belongs on here.
Oh, I'm not about to say it's not. I do think it has earned its place as, like, a Sega Legacy title, but it's not the most, I know that this is a game that a lot of people are very nostalgic for. I think it has its place in, like, the arcades and stuff like that. But, it's just you walk and you punch, and that's about it. And sometimes turn into a beast. But, hey, it's worth it for its legacy. And then we have Beyond Oasis. Now, do you know anything about this one?
I do not.
So, I can't remember if it's called, like, Legend of Thor or something outside of North America.
The story of Thor.
Yeah.
In Europe and Japan.
So, I've like started this up a couple times, never really given it a super fair shot, but it's a very interesting game. It's like a lot of people might compare it to something like Legend of Zelda, but on the Sega, but I would say it's more in line with something like Terranigma with how it feels. But it also, because it's got a lot of like a Secret of Mana. I'm throwing in so many games to compare this to, but a top-down action game with a nice open feel to it. It's a proper adventure game. I don't think it functions in chapters or anything. I think it's neat and a high recommend, so it can stay.
Good enough.
Yeah, and then we have I think Mickey's Castle of Illusion, and this is where I think the Genesis really shines, is they actually cracked the code to getting some of their licensed games back for their mini console, which, you know what, we might dunk on licensed games a lot these days, but back then, they were quality, and the Disney games were almost like the peak of the licensed quality. So, though I don't have a lot of experience with the Castle of Illusion game, yeah, it could stay.
Yeah, so with Castle of Illusion and bringing on that point that you just brought up, Sega licensed games actually did really, really well. Like, they took their time with the development behind them. And they just, compared to the Nintendo licensed games, or licensed titles, Sega had them beat.
Oh, and they were significantly more memorable too. Like I think if you like the Batman game on Genesis is much more fondly remembered than anything that was Batman related on the Super Nintendo. So yeah, licensed games are definitely like a big part of
when the creator of the Aladdin for the Super Nintendo says that the Sega has the better version.
That's kind of impressive, actually. I've always been really fond of the Super Nintendo Aladdin myself, but that's because I obviously nostalgia, and it feels very Capcom, which I just really enjoy.
Yep.
Yeah, but back on track, moving beyond the Castle of Illusion, we have, yes, very much so, Castlevania Bloodlines. Surely you must know this one.
Yes, I do. I beat it actually last year, I believe, on the Castlevania collection.
It's an interesting beast for a Castlevania game because it almost feels more proper than Super Castlevania 4.
I liked it a lot more than Super Castlevania 4.
Yeah,
to be completely honest, I don't think Super Castlevania 4 lives up to its reputation as much.
I personally like it more as well, and it was always a shame that it was trapped on the Sega. So yeah, I'm very happy to see this is here. As for this gets a sure you can stay pass in my mind, which would be Columns. Have you ever played a Columns?
It's just a match 3 puzzle.
It's just a match 3 puzzle. It's here for somebody. Moving on.
Somebody's happy about it. Good enough. It's not Hatris.
No, you know what I'm actually really want to track down and try sometime, and this appeals to the big word nerd in me, which is Wordtris, which is just build words out of falling letters. It looks horrible, and I want it.
Yep,
Yeah.
I could get behind that.
It's an interesting premise all the same. But yeah, so the next game, which is an interesting curiosity and also a very, really well presented game for its time, but it's also incredibly hard. Some might say the Dark Souls. Anyway, Comic Zone. Have you ever seen a Comic Zone?
It's a beat 'em up. Didn't touch it.
It's a little bit more than a beat 'em up, though. Like, its combat is very beat 'em up, yes, but there's a lot of puzzle solving aspects to this game, actually. I'll just give you kind of like I've tried playing Comic Zone a bit. It's almost like one of those like you might want a guide to bring along, but you have a lot of multiple choices in the path that you can take to progress through this game because you're basically exploring through a comic book, right? So you could either go to the panel on the right or the panel below you or something, or sometimes you'll bust through a panel. Like, aesthetically, it's very impressive. But you have 3 item slots in this game, and you'll find stuff like you can find a throwable weapon or something that'll heal you down the road, or you'll just find an item that has absolutely no use as far as you know, and you use it in this one specific panel, and it does things. Like, it's a surprisingly clever game, but I don't think anyone likes it.
So it's questionable at best.
It is very Sega, so it could stay for that fact. Here's one that is of a franchise that I'm not too crazy about, probably the one that I want to like get good at the most, and that's Contra Hardcore.
Yeah, I haven't played this. Again, we talked about it in the part one of this series. Contra, I don't have too much experience with. I'm going to soon, hopefully. And yeah, I mean, I don't see any reason for it not being on here, aside from maybe the D-pad kind of sucks for this style game.
I think that would be a matter of preference. But I also know that, like, yeah, it involves a lot of shooting at an angle and stuff like that. It can be a little tricky. But I booted up hardcore a couple times. Probably gotten only ever as far as the second level, if I can even get that far at times. But it has the most heavy metal opening level of almost anything I played on the Sega. It is really cool. But
that doesn't surprise me.
No. Moving on. This is something that is probably my top pick on the mini console, which would be Darius. And the interesting thing about this is the Genesis Mini's Star Fox 2, essentially.
Really?
It's clearly not nearly as reputable as Star Fox 2. Like, a lot of people know that whole history and whatnot, as where this is just one of those straight arcade ports that never came about. And I played a fair bit of it. I played a bunch of the Darius games. I'm not about to say that I'm good at them, but I really like them, which is strange because shoot-em-ups aren't really my thing. But I'm happy to see this is here. It makes me pleased. And I guess, yeah, as a bonus entry, it's neat, so it can stay.
Fair enough.
Yeah, that's my thoughts. I know you're just like, shoot-em-ups, neat.
Well, at the same time, I think it's kind of important to have an understanding. Like, in Japan, Sega is big with its arcade systems.
Yes.
Right?
And
Darius being bigger in the arcades, yeah, it makes sense to see it here, and it's also kind of neat, because, yeah, it's a Genesis port of the arcade game, not just some version of the arcade game.
Well,
right?
And that's actually kind of an interesting thing when you put it that way, because the Genesis got a lot more straight arcade versions than the Super Nintendo did when they got ports of similar games. So, for example, the Super Nintendo has a Darius game, but it is original to the Super Nintendo, brand new, new levels and all that stuff exclusive, as where with the Genesis, when they wanted to do a game in the franchise, they just went straight arcade. Another example that I can think of doing this is Joe and Mac.
Okay.
The Super Nintendo version, I think, has a lot of stuff that was created original for that, and the Sega one is like a straight-up arcade conversion. So, just a random little tangent about that Sega feel. But after that, we have Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine. And this is a game I know a lot of people are pretty fond of.
Yeah, and being part of the Sonic franchise, Sonic is what kind of drove the sales of the Sega as well in North America. He was the Mario for Sega, right? So a spin-off of a Sonic game makes sense.
I think what's funny about this is Sonic's not even in the title. So it takes some familiarity with the franchise to know that this is a Sonic spin-off. Because what is a Robotnik?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you would have had to play the Sonic games to actually know, right? You know what's even funnier about that, though?
What's that?
If the system language is set to Japanese, the game is replaced with Puyo Puyo.
I like that detail, actually. Yeah, there's actually a lot of tweaking that you can do with the regional settings. Like going back to Contra Hardcore for a second there, if you change your region to Japanese, maybe Europe as well, instead of it being the one-hit deaths, you actually have 3 hits before you die. So it makes the game a little bit more approachable.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so there's...
it's like a practice mode.
It is. It's still incredibly hard.
Yeah?
It's not helping me, that's for sure. But, yeah, Mean Bean Machine, it's... I think it's I guess someone who's really not too crazy about your falling tile puzzle games and whatnot. I think I like it more than Columns. It doesn't feel more Sega, but it still feels very Sega because it's the whole Sonic spin-off and such. So, sure.
It's themed Sega more than Columns. And Columns was an arcade game from Atari, I believe.
I don't know about that, but I know it's on every single Sega collection that ever comes out in some shape or form. They always have to cram Columns in, so.
Yeah.
But
so what's next?
We have Dynamite Heady, which is by the Sega's basically Rare, which is Treasure, and I haven't really played a lot of Dynamite Headdy, but just from that, I know it's wacky, just a weird game. But it seems like
Aren't you an ant or something?
I don't know what the heck you are, but I know that, like, so your main attack is just, like, launching your head at stuff, and you can find different power-ups to change your head into things. Like, if I'm not mistaken, you can turn it into, like, a stick of dynamite or something, and it does, like, a screen-clearing attack. It's very, very weird and very fitting to the weird, wacky kind of things we were up to in the 90s. But I do know that it is a quality platformer by a quality company. So, yeah, I want to try it out more. I think it should be here.
Good enough.
Yeah.
I mean, treasure representation would be like having rare representation on the SNES and NES, right?
That's just it. And they're almost like a can do no wrong kind of company as a developer for this console. So it would be, if it had nothing, it would be a tragedy. So it's good that it does have some. And I think there's a few treasure games. We'll touch on that when we get to them. But yeah, moving past that. And this is something that, though it was on both, it does feel more Sega. And that would be Earthworm Jim.
Yep.
I feel like when you think Earthworm Jim, Sega comes to mind more than Super Nintendo, yeah?
It does, yeah.
Yeah.
And I've only played it on the Sega, to be honest. I know we rented it a few times and always enjoyed it. Or maybe we borrowed it off a friend. I can't remember, but played it on the Sega anyways, not the Super Nintendo.
I owned it for the Super Nintendo, so that's where my experience with it is primarily. But I know that I also played it, because I think my cousin had a Sega Genesis, and that's where most of my experience with it came, and he had it for that. And, I mean, for the most part, it is the same game with a few minor differences, and I do think it's the Sega one that has the bonus extra level, but in any sense, yeah, this is a Sega game through and through.
And if I'm not wrong, so is the next one? Doesn't mean it's good.
Oh, this is one of those games that I like.
Starts off great, ends poorly.
Oh, Nightmare Fuel. Straight up Nightmare Fuel. But this is an interesting... First of all, I'm going to say yes, Echo the Dolphin 100% belongs here. It is just a Sega game through and through. But it's also so weird. But I like that... This is very much like a piece of that era that they were really willing to try anything when it comes to new ideas, right?
Which is welcome.
Yeah.
I wish they'd do that again nowadays.
Yeah. Now, does that mean, like, I've played Echo quite a bit, and I've never really gotten that far. I've never really just gotten the feel for it, but I think we all know how it goes. I won't explicitly discuss it here, but, like, it's not the same as the first impression.
No, it starts off strong and very quickly turns into a garbage chute.
Yeah, but I think, Echo the Dolphin very much belongs here.
Yep.
Now, the next one, I didn't even know about this game beforehand, would be Eternal Champions. And this is just a 2D fighting game, but it's also a game that's very reliant on a 6-button controllers. And so, though I'm glad this console has fighting games on it, I don't like that there's basically a wall to enjoy them. Because to explain how to actually play this, because it still has enough inputs for a 6-button controller, and these are all available to you on a 3-button controller. But the best way I can explain it, so your top row of buttons would be your high punch, high kick, etc., right? And the bottom row would be your low punch, low kick, all that kind of stuff. But if you don't have a 6-button controller, you have to press the start button to swap your control scheme.
Oh.
Yeah, like it doesn't go into a pause menu, it just does it, but at the same time, it's incredibly cumbersome and not fun. So, like, sure, fighting game representation on here, I understand, but if they were gonna go that length, please include the proper hardware.
Yeah.
But if I'm not mistaken, Eternal Champions is one of those, like, notoriously Sega-violent games.
So it makes sense that it's on here, just aside from the no 6-button controller, unless you pay extra for it. Which, first mini console to have accessories, I suppose?
Yeah, but it's accessories for the wrong reasons.
Mm-hmm.
But and that is one thing that the Genesis Mini 2 did, is they actually do have 6-button controllers.
They learned.
But that's really the only thing we're going to touch on with that beast. But Eternal Champions, it's not my first thought when I think Sega, because I would think, Mortal Kombat, right? And which is absent on this. So that's kind of a missed opportunity in my mind, but because if I'm not mistaken, there's a lot of like disemboweling and blood and gore. Like again, it's that what you think when you think the Sega, right? Sure, why not?
It's not sweat, it's blood.
Yeah, ew. But the next game is one I've played a little bit, and I think I actually like it more than its Super Nintendo counterpart, which is Ghouls and Ghosts.
So is this like the Super Ghouls and Ghosts Sega version?
Yes, but they are very different games. I can't...
Or it's Ghosts and Goblins on Nintendo systems, right?
I think I have it written down. I should... what are we... Super Ghouls and Ghosts and Ghouls and Ghosts. So unless I just wrote the same thing twice, I think they do have the same name. But either way, it does have a lot of differences going for it, like the different attacks, different armors that you get, power-ups. Like, not everything is one-to-one. And also, I believe it's this one that still has the double jump, which completely changes how you play the game.
Oh, that would, yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know how much experience you have with these games, but it's a very stilted jump, not unlike like the original Castlevania games. So, for example, if you're doing a double jump, you choose your arc, you arc right, and if you're not holding the direction, your second jump will either be straight up or also right or left in that very stiff arc. You don't have control mid-air. So it's a very strategic kind of jumping. If you want to not die anyway. But yeah, I think this belongs here very much so.
Yeah, I'm all for that.
This next one, it feels very Sega. It would be Golden Axe.
This should be on here. It's well known as the Sega title. It's one of the more heard about. Sega titles.
It's a very iconic thing. Like they would consider Golden Axe to be almost like a mascot franchise outside of your Sonic and whatnot. I don't know which of the series, because I think there's 3 of them on the Genesis. I don't know which one would be particularly regarded as the best, but just as representation, yeah, Golden Axe, it can be here. That makes sense to me.
And it had the same developers as Altered Beast.
Oh yeah, that's right. Well, between this and Altered Beast, I think this is a better game.
Yep.
But yeah, and moving on from that, something that is a truly legendary, like this is one of those games that I think people would put like in the top 3 games of the Genesis, which would be Gunstar Heroes.
Yes.
Yeah. So
and again,
have you played...
another treasure game, so...
Yeah, have you played Gunstar at all?
Nope, I've seen this be played, though. And it looks pretty damn good in comparison to some of the other titles that I've seen here.
It's a lot of fun. I've never actually really played this, but I have played... I think it's like a sequel/reboot, but I think it's called Super Gunstar Heroes for the Game Boy Advance. And it's pretty much... just a remake. Like, I think you go more or less to the same levels, same bosses and stuff. A few things are tweaked, and maybe the plot, but I'm not about to assume I know the plot. But just the Gunstar Heroes formula, solid. And apparently one of the best co-op experiences on the console. Yeah, so, just more treasure. Treasure is always good.
Might have to try co-op one day.
Yeah, I think that would be a good time. But this next one, I don't think is a good time.
He's so cool, though.
He is 90s as 90s all get up. Kid Chameleon, which the box art alone for this game just completely talks about where the priorities of the 90s kids were at. He's gotta have...
it's about being the cool kid.
He's gotta have sunglasses and a leather jacket, and if I'm not mistaken, a skateboard. I don't remember.
I think it's like a hoverboard.
The game doesn't end. It's got...
What do you mean?
I think it's got like over 100 levels.
Jesus.
Oh yeah, and it's just get to the end of the level, get to the end of the level. Like, I don't think there's any boss fights or anything like that. The cool thing is, you have all these different transformations, and it is exciting for a bit, but it's not really that great game. It's worth trying out of sheer morbid curiosity, but I do not recommend actually giving it a serious go, because you're going to get to like level 30 and just go like, why? What am I doing with my life?
Now, does it repeat levels or are they individual levels?
I feel like they are all different, but they have a procedurally generated feel about them. Like, I know that's not what it is, but you're gonna like go to the same biomes every 6 levels or something like that, right? With just different layouts.
Okay.
It's not fun.
So it's the Breath of the Wild shrines.
It's no
Ooh.
no worse than that. I would say how do I make a comparison like this? It's like going from Meat Boy to that other Meat Boy game that I can't recall.
Meat Boy Forever?
Yeah, the Auto Runner. It's just, it doesn't feel as well made as other things, is my analysis. But
Fair enough.
Moving beyond that, we have a game called Landstalker, which you would almost swear that this game came out after Ocarina of Time, just because of how much their main character looks like such a Link ripoff.
Oh, he does too. Jesus.
It's such a weird game. It's an isometric kind of adventure game. It feels strange. I've tried playing it for a little while, but it has a problem that I find with a lot of Sega games, and this is something that I'm sure someone who grew up with the Sega would probably have more fondness for than I do, but like, everything's so big.
Yeah.
Why is everything so big?
And like I said, I just finished playing Mega Man 7 and everything was big in that.
Oh, no, it's not
just
Sega
off-putting.
big, though.
It's not Sega big, but...
No.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting beast, just like a classic adventure game. So it's weird. If you can get past the weird isometric grid-based platforming, maybe it's worth your time.
If I can play Star Tropics, I could probably play that.
Oh, there's an interesting challenge for you then. But the next one...
A lot of action adventure games.
There are, yeah. I don't know. It's the one thing I will say, it's more quantity over quality, I would say. Not to say that these have all been bad games or anything, but it does feel like a total mixed bag, right?
Yeah. Not as much as the PlayStation, but...
I almost think the PlayStation, though it is a kind of a shameful list compared to what it could have, it did at least represent its genres well. Almost to a fault, though, like I said, with the too many puzzle games, right? Like, because it was only working with 20, as where this is 40.
Yes.
But moving after Landstalker, we have, and I think this is the game I'm thinking of, it's called The Last Crusader. I think it's a treasure game, but I might be wrong about it. Is?
It is.
Okay.
Last Crusader or Light Crusader?
It might be Light Crusader? I can't remember. But if it's the game...
My list says Light Crusader, action-adventure game developed by Treasure.
And there is not a game on the console called Last Crusader.
Nope.
Oh, so I wrote it down wrong. So Light Crusader is... It's weird. It looks like Diablo in its atmosphere.
Oh, weird.
And it's another isometric adventure game like Landstalker, but a little bit more action-y and not so, you don't feel as stuck on a grid. It's weird. I've played it a little bit, but maybe only for about an hour or something. I think it's an interesting curiosity. And the fact that it's by Treasure doing basically an action RPG, it's kind of worth its curiosity for that alone.
It's part of the Treasure history, right?
Exactly. This next one, I don't know if we discussed this all before or not, but this one I think should be here, but I have words about it, which would be Mega Man The Wily Wars.
Ah, yes.
So I think this is a really interesting piece of Mega Man history in the sense that, it's basically the Super Mario All-Stars of the first 3 Mega Man games, right? It is full-blown remakes, and they feel very different because, well, they're on Sega, but also they have updated graphics, music, etc. But on top of that, when you beat these 3 games, you get access to the Wily Tower mode, which is a full, wholly original content, but you get to pick 8 weapons out of all of the weapons that you've gotten in all 3 Mega Man games to take on the Wily Tower.
Oh, neat.
It is a really cool concept, but you have to get through these not bad, but not as enjoyable as the original trilogy. But, having said that, one, it's the only Mega Man representation on the console, and also, it was never actually officially released, at least physically, in America, or this side of the world, I should say.
Right.
So it was exclusive to the Sega channel, which I clearly had no idea even existed until the age of like internet and all that stuff. But it was basically just like Netflix for Sega games, but through your cable.
Which is really neat and innovative for the time.
It's kind of cool how these things did exist long ago, but they were too ahead of their time to actually take off, right?
Yeah.
So I think it belongs here. Do I think it's a great game? Yeah, sort of. It's an interesting
It's okay.
one. But I'm not about to say it doesn't belong here. And
I think it belongs here just because I'm a bit of a sucker for anything that wasn't released over here, but they released it with the mini consoles.
yeah.
Like Star Fox 2, yes.
Yeah.
Mega Man The Wily Wars, yeah.
So it's cool that it's here. I would also say this next one, I think, is another one that wasn't released here, which is Monster World 4. And I don't really have any experience with the Monster World games, but apparently they're kind of Metroidvania-like.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Almost like 2D platformer adventure games. Because I think I've played, there's another Monster World game on this console that, like, you actually do go around, like, you grind gold from enemies, you go back to town, buy better equipment, buy things to progress, or find them from dungeons. Like, it's actually pretty cool. And I know that the Monster World series is a very popular one for the Sega when it comes to its legacy, so not something I have a lot of experience with, but very much belongs here. So, yeah, worth a shot, I'd say.
Good enough. I've never actually heard of it, so...
Yeah. Next one. Now, I haven't played really anything for straight-up RPGs on the Sega, but Phantasy Star, I think 4, is it?
Yep.
Yeah, and
The End of the Millennium.
this is Sega's Final Fantasy, or I guess even you could more so say Dragon Quest.
Yeah. I think that closer represents it.
Yeah, it is. For the people I know who have played it, people love the old school Phantasy Star games. Do I know anything about them? No.
Just like the Final Fantasy games and Dragon Quest games, they have their issues, but it's a pretty solid game.
It's got its pedigree, that's for sure. So, and just for representation of the genre itself, like, yeah, this belongs here. Could I say any of the Phantasy Stars belong here in its place? Personally, no. I think it's one of those games with like kind of a very loose timeline where like 4, you don't need to play the previous ones. I don't know, but yeah,
I don't think so, no.
It gets its place just for what it is.
What do we got next?
This one, I have a lot of it. I actually own this game, which I do not own very many physical Sega titles, but this is one I had to have because I played it a lot as a child, and it is Road Rash 2. And I can't think of anything other than Sonic that is more Sega than Road Rash.
Okay.
It's just so it's very arcadey in like, you know, the solid kind of racing game where it doesn't really feel like you're moving along a map. It's just kind of an illusion of a moving road, right?
Yeah.
But you just kind of throw in, hey, what if you could just punch your opponent?
As they drive by, and it's all motorcycles, right?
Yep. And the whole thing too is like, you know, there's combat with your opponents, but at the end of the day, like, it is a racing game, right? But you also have to make sure you don't get caught fighting by the cops or you'll get arrested. And I kind of like how it's got a little bit of RPG mechanics to it where, like, you know, you're winning races, you're getting money, you're buying better parts to take on different races. So I very much think Road Rash, especially the fact that they went with 2, very much belongs here. This is Sega through and through.
Yeah. I'm down for that, yeah.
The next one, another one that I admittedly don't have much experience with, but it's a tactical RPG, and that would be Shining Force.
The subtitle of it is fantastic.
Which is?
Shining Force, The Legacy of Great Intention.
Oh, we just wanted to do our best. Oh,
That just for that title, that belongs on the Sega because
Yep.
they had great intentions.
Hit my house with good intentions. Yeah, so another one I don't have much experience with, and I'm also not particularly fond of tactics RPGs, but I also know, like Phantasy Star, this is a series that has very held high in regard, so it belongs here for that. Also, just a random interesting tidbit, I believe this is the team that would go on to make Golden Sun eventually.
I think so, yeah.
And Mario Golf.
Wait, is that the same team?
Camelot. It's so weird, isn't it? That's why this is straying a little bit from the Sega. But have you ever played Mario Golf for the Game Boy Advance?
Yes.
Okay. So
sorry, no.
no?
Game Boy Color I'm thinking of.
Well, they did that one too, but the one for Game Boy Advance, because they're golf RPGs, right?
Yep.
There are so many reused assets from Golden Sun in Mario Golf. It is hilarious.
That doesn't surprise me then. If it's the same company, right?
But it's so funny to think, like, Golden Sun is just a very high fantasy RPG, but also looks so painfully similar to Golf with Mario.
So I don't think this is the same company though.
Camelot?
Yeah, Climax.
I think they were that before they became Camelot.
Oh, that's weird.
Yeah. But one thing
they used to be called Sonic Software Planning.
Oh?
And then they became Camelot.
Peculiar.
Oh, that's weird.
But other than that,
like, they're a Nintendo company now, and they were a Sega company.
Just making all those smart moves back in the day, clearly.
Like the Nintendo PlayStation.
Hey, you know what? That's an interesting timeline to not exist in. But next we have another legendary game that I've played a little bit. I can't really say I can get too behind it, but I could see how, like, back in the day it would be pretty top notch, which is Shinobi 3.
This is one I want to give a go one day. Actually, to be quite honest, a lot of these games where I don't know anything about them, I really need to sit down and check them all out. Because some of them sound like right up my alley.
I would say that a lot of the Sega library is, if you are a big fan of the Super Nintendo, like, yeah, it does feel very different, but Sega has a lot of quality early, like, 90s experiences that are very much still worth your time.
There's a reason they gave Nintendo a run for their money.
Exactly. I played a bit of Shinobi 3, though. It's just a side-scrolling action platformer. I don't dislike it, but it's not something that immediately pulls me in. I mean, I don't really have the nostalgia for it either, right? But that said, I understand its legacy, so it belongs here, yeah.
Yeah.
These next two, which I am including together because that just makes sense. Yes, just Sonic 1 and 2. Like, you can't have the Genesis without Sonic. That's, a ham sandwich without ham.
But where's 3?
Behind a legal wall.
I hate it.
Yeah.
Because that's the one I love. Like, Sonic 2 is good. Sure. Sonic 3 was my golden child.
If it weren't for the fact that they play so differently, I would almost say they could probably just get away with having Sonic 2 and not Sonic 1 and 2. But they do operate quite differently mechanically, so I can see why there's both.
I think it's kind of important because Sonic being the kind of Mario-like, you should have the Sonic games on here.
And I was going to say, though, because it's 1 and 2, it would have been nice if they went the extra mile and just got 3 and Knuckles.
Yep.
But because it's not, and it takes up 2, it's just kind of weird. It's either have them all or have, like, put your best foot forward, right?
Yeah.
But, that said, I'm not about to say in any way, shape, or form that it doesn't belong here.
It's Sega's Mario. Of course it belongs here.
Yeah, so that would be that. I guess we should probably start trying to rip through these a little bit faster.
Yep.
We have Sonic Spinball.
Doesn't exist.
Doesn't exist. Moving on. But actually, I have a soft spot for Sonic Spinball. It's pinball.
Fine. Yeah.
It's Sonic. It's just as much belongs here as Bean Machine, except it's actually its own game.
Yep.
Next game, Space Harrier 2. I hate it. I hate it so much. I hate it.
I hate the box art. That's all I know.
It's kind of like, a Star Fox sort of game, right? Is it iconic and legendary? Sure. Do I personally like it? No, I never have. Moving on from that, this is another dilemma. Same with what did I call it? With the fighting game, Eternal Champions.
6 button.
Yeah, yeah. So this is Street Fighter 2 Championship Edition. I'm not sure the specific one, but same problem.
It's a Street Fighter 2. Why not?
It's a Street Fighter 2. Why not? But also didn't provide the same proper hardware. So next, another game that you very much think Sega with, Streets of Rage 2.
Oh, of course.
Beat 'em ups, and I have such a weird soft spot for the incredibly bit crunched audio of like the screams of pain in this game. So yeah, Streets of Rage for sure.
Quite honestly, as much as I don't care about beat 'em ups, Streets of Rage series is one I want to check out. Just because it's one I hear about all the time.
They're pretty solid. As far as beat 'em ups go, yeah, I would say they're up there with like Super Nintendo had the Final Fight games. So, and yeah, it makes me, I think Sega when I think Streets of Rage. Next we have Strider. Strider it's good. It's fast-paced. I haven't played much of it. I should play it more, but it's very... Do you know Strider?
I know it was originally a arcade game.
Yep.
I believe.
Yep. Run fast, cut fast. It's a good Sega time.
Good old hack and slash platformer.
Yeah, Fantasy Zone. This is another one I don't really like, and I think it's only here just because it's a Sega Legacy title. It's like a shoot 'em up, but you don't necessarily go in just one direction, and it's really colorful and cutesy. Like the Fantasy Zone ship is a mascot, but for me, meh. But I can see why it's here.
Yep, that's fair.
This is the really hilarious inclusion that this has, though. Tetris, actual Tetris. Yeah. Yep.
How?
The Sega got what Nintendo.
Oh dear.
Yeah. So
that's funny.
You know what? Sure, you got Columns, but you got Tetris 2. Take that, Nintendo. But
that's funny.
Yeah, and then so Thunder Force 3 is next. It's a shooter. It's like I think the Thunder Force is like Sega's R-Type.
Okay.
I don't know specifically, but like if that is the case, sure, that belongs here. Another one.
The next game is a gem.
I haven't played it as much as I want to, and I really want to give it a deep go just because of what it is. But Toe Jam and Earl.
It's such a weird game, but yeah, I'm down for it. It's a weird roguelike from the era.
Well, and that was something that I didn't really know it was a roguelike until not too long ago. But it's a very interesting beast. So yeah, and it's so Sega that it hurts.
Yes.
Like, it is the most, like, try-hard 90s, so, and yet it's unironic. Like, there's nothing else like it.
No.
Not even Toe Jam and Earl 2. It's nothing like this game. It's the sequel.
It's its own beast.
Yeah.
100%.
The next... the next one is Vector Man 2, which... I've played the Vector Man games a bunch, and I don't think they're fun, but they're neat. They are, like, basically Sega's Donkey Kong Country when it comes to, like, graphical fidelity.
Okay.
And it's just this guy made of orbs. He's a robot, and, like, everything's all dark and brooding. Like, the graphics for the time are very interesting. It's kind of a run and gun. I feel like people have probably tried to compare it to Metroid, but it's nothing like Metroid.
Oh no.
But Vector
and I
Man...
bet you it's better than Pepsi Man.
Probably, actually. But on the note of Pepsi Man, I just want to say now that we've gotten this far, the fact that the 7-Up game isn't here, like, I get the license thing and whatnot, but it makes me sad, because that is such a Sega game in my mind.
I think I've only played on the Super Nintendo.
Oh, well.
Spot Goes to Hollywood, I think.
I just thought it was called Cool Spot.
There's Cool Spot for the NES.
Interesting.
I know it was on Sega, one of the Spot games. But yeah.
So, yeah, Vector Man 1 or 2. I guess people think 2 is better. I don't know. I do know that 2 had a contest that you could win cash, that I don't know if that actually happened.
Play to Win
But
was
if
on the box art.
yeah,
Vector Man.
yeah, it's very. I think that's pretty much what got it sold. The next game is weird that it's here, which is Virtua Fighter 2, and it's one of the ugliest games I've ever seen. Because Virtua Fighter was like a 3D, like a big revolutionary thing, and I guess they made a version for the Genesis, and it's not 3D, and everything's so chunky and slow and weird looking. No, you have enough fighting games here. Go away. That's my
There's
thoughts
a lot
on
of
that.
and probably the same controller issue without the 6 buttons.
Yep. Got 2 more here. We have Wonder Boy and Monster World, which this is one that I really need to spend time with. This is the one I played a little bit before and is very much that Metroidvania formula where you you want to go grind out some money and whatnot, explore, get your gated progress. Yes, and yes.
Absolutely.
And lastly, another one that, I've been repeating myself a lot, but like I said at the start, we're both not as familiar, but I'm a little bit more familiar with the Genesis, but we have the World of Illusion, the other Disney game.
Yes, which is starring Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck.
Yeah, and I think this one is very well known for its good co-op, I think.
I'm guessing so, given that it has both.
But again, it just comes down to that, they got the solid license representation, which is just good.
Yeah, no, they did licensing really good.
Just ran a marathon of Sega games, my goodness.
I apologize for not being able to contribute that much.
Oh, it's all right. It's their fault for having so many games on it. But you know what's really shocking to me about all of the games that they have? And this is a point I made before, and it's weird that I'm making this point, but it's even stranger that of all those games,
sports?
There's no sports.
No, there's not.
And the Sega was very much the sports console back in the day, right?
Was it, though?
Oh, yeah. Sports was definitely, if you were a sports kid, you
I guess
had Sega.
EA put out a lot of games
They
with
put
the
them out
little
for...
yellow tab on their cartridge, taller than the rest.
And they also, they were obviously on both consoles, but Sega was far more associated with the sports crowd. And what's even weirder is they didn't even go with any of the quirky ones. There's, Mutant League football or hockey and stuff like that, right? So...
Yeah.
I don't know. I just think out of the 40-ish games that you've got, not a single sports game is almost a little baffling.
It is. Out of 40 games, they got lots of beat-em-ups and lots of fighting games without proper hardware.
Good amount of shoot-em-ups, puzzles. It's a good variety, but just the fact that, not a single sports game.
Yeah.
But I will say, of the 4 consoles, the Genesis Mini is kind of the sleeper hit.
It is.
But it's not my favorite.
Yeah, I think the SNES is going to be my favorite.
It just feels so good.
Now, one thing that we did in part 1 that we didn't do in part 2, so let's do this quickly, because this is already getting super long.
Yeah, we've got 2 full-length feature films of a podcast for this one topic.
Yeah, thanks for letting us enter your ear holes for so long.
Thanks, us.
So, PlayStation Classic. Is there any one game, or maybe 2 because of how terrible the library was, that you would want on there?
I think it's easy. So my personal one is obviously something that I could... Legend of Mana, I would make me really happy to see that. Or maybe one of the Mega Man games. I would like a little bit more classic sprite-based interpretation. But even instead of definitively saying a game that I would want, it's just the amount of missed opportunity. Where is Naughty Dog?
Yeah. The fact that there's no Crash Bandicoot.
Or
which
no
I didn't even think about until I said that.
Or there's a Medieval. There are so many missed opportunities with the PlayStation Mini that it's not even a matter of what I would personally want on it. There's so much stuff that just made perfect sense to be there that wasn't, right? Now,
so I'm assuming with that stuff is Medieval had a remake.
Yeah.
When this came out, or around the same time.
Yeah.
Spyro and
also.
Crash Bandicoot also had remakes, so they're probably hoping that you go buy those.
but it's still so weird that they're not there.
Yep.
So, I don't know. But yeah, okay, if we're going to say my personal picks, I'll go with 3, which would be Legend of Mana, Mega Man, let's say X4, because, or even, no, dual analogs, can't say that. So yes, Mega Man X4, or, I said I had 3, and then the third one just magically disappeared. Oh, that's right, we already talked about it. Legend of Dragoon.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I think my personal picks for representation would be.
So for me personally, I actually have a couple, but Parasite Eve,
Ah, yes.
which the Japanese version actually got, and it upsets me. Because personally, I love Parasite Eve. I feel it doesn't get the credit that it deserves. Little rough around the edges today, yeah. But for the time, I mean, I remember playing it on release, and it was just... It freaked me the hell out. With some of these cutscene transformations and everything.
I think it's, like, I haven't played it, but I think it's a very interesting game, how it's, like, Square's take on Resident Evil.
It is, and it's not. Like, Parasite Eve 2 is much more Resident Evil feel. I don't care for Parasite Eve 2 as much. It's still a good game, but it goes to that tank control kind of thing like Resident Evil. It's very strange.
That is,
It's much more survival horror.
It's a curious beast, that's for sure.
It's a weird series, and we never talk about the third one.
No, it didn't happen. Not part of the franchise by title.
No.
But,
and as a second one, God, there's so many.
Tomb Raider?
Oh yeah, Tomb Raider's not in here.
Like, there's so many things that should be here.
What the hell, Sony?
Yeah.
You guys dropped the ball.
Yeah, so I feel like we could go on
I'd say
and on.
Castlevania.
That one I would even agree with. Like, why? It would scratch that niche of, like, you've got Rayman or Symphony of the Night.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As for Sega, same question, but one that I would want to see as a personal taste or personal thing is Sonic 3 or Dungeons and Dragons. Oh, what is the title?
Shadows over Mystara? No, that sounds very wrong. That sounds like it's World of Warcraft stuff.
It's the Eternal Sun or something.
Champions of the Eternal Sun?
Warriors of the Eternal Sun, I think.
I do know the game that you're talking about, and it actually looks kind of fun. Like,
Warriors of the Eternal Sun.
I'm not really a Dungeons and Dragons person, but I like the games, and it looks like it was really cool.
I'm not a Dungeons and Dragons guy either, but like, it was one of those weird games that we just happen to have, and we played a lot, and never really understood it, and I've gone back to it like the odd time, and I've seen playthroughs now as an adult, and it's like, oh, I really want to do this because this actually looks fun. It's weird. What about you? Anything for Sega?
So, I haven't played it. Something I would want to play, which I believe is on the Genesis 2. Maybe it'll be a topic one day in the future, but I don't know if that's going to be something we'll end up getting hands-on experience with. But a game called Crusader of Senti, which is an obscure action game, not unlike Zelda, but if it was handled by Atlas. But I guess if I was going to go with something that I have personal experience with that I would like to see is... neither of them are good, but I feel like there's a lot of bad games on Sega that are like just good out of pure nostalgia. So there's Green Dog, the beached up surfer dude, which is just an incredibly mediocre platformer that just screams 90s. Or the Jurassic Park game.
Oh.
Yeah, those would be my my personal picks to add on to the veritable buffet of games on the Genesis Mini.
I don't know the first one, but Jurassic Park, yeah, that kind of seems, I'm down for that.
You get to be a raptor, and it even says Sega when you open the game. I've never seen a raptor talk. Great way to set the tone.
That's really cool.
So I think before we close out this topic, now I know that we were going to go into a elaborate discussion of building our own, but seeing our runtime, maybe we'll just touch on things that we would like to see as mini consoles, and maybe one day we'll revisit this and build our grand design.
Yeah, who knows what's going to be out in the future?
But
I don't think that there's enough just to talk about our own designs, but maybe there is. It's 2 consoles, and we've done 2 consoles in 2 hours.
It's amazing what you can get when you expand with your imagination.
Oh, and also price point for the Sega Genesis Mini was $100 Canadian, so that would be $80 US.
That's so for what you get. That's pretty good.
Yeah, you got 20 more titles than Sony.
Genesis.
Assuming that you bought it at release.
Yeah.
If you bought it when I bought it, you got it for $30.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. But I guess we will say as well, at least the PlayStation has the redeeming quality of being an emulation workhorse.
It is, unless you want the dual analog sticks. There are ways, but you can't get the D-pad and analog sticks working independently.
Yeah, but I've also seen it run DS games on a TV, which is just kind of cool.
This is fair.
Yeah, but yeah, so console that you would like to see, a thing maybe in a smaller state. What would you like to see?
Honestly, Game Boy Advance.
Ooh, you're speaking to my heart with that one.
The Game Boy Advance just had so many really good, like that's the time when handhelds really packed a punch. Like Game Boy was great. Game Boy Color was great, but then you got the Game Boy Advance, and it's why it didn't have a lit up screen aside from the SP, I don't know, but just the color fidelities and the stories and how much length the games had, they felt like actual home console games in your hand. Castlevania, Circle of the Moon, Harmony of Dissonance, you got some of the Super Mario games on there, just so many great games. Mother 3 if it ever came out over here. So many
like
good things.
This is one of those things where we don't even need to talk about it being a mini console of any kind. We can just talk about the Game Boy Advance, and I'm sure that would go on for hours about that thing.
Yes. So I'm going to wrap it up there, but yeah, Game Boy Advance. There's the turning point for handheld games. I feel like for being more than just little gimmicks.
Well, now I feel kind of silly because I'm going to be ending this on a joke, and yet a joke I'm taking very seriously.
Virtual Boy?
Virtual Boy. Very much so. That's seriously what my thought was, because like it's how many games was it in total? Because this would be one of those things where I would be like, get everything that came out for it, right?
Yeah.
22. So you could that's a nice small, and like please give us a way to play it that's not like the Virtual Boy. But
almost like transported to what would be considered like a new age Game Boy.
Right? Maybe even go all out. Maybe call it like, like the Virtual Boy 2 or something like that, where you've actually like
you build it out of cardboard.
Well, I think that's all the time we have for tonight, folks. Yeah, that has been a full, complete, lengthy discussion of miniature consoles.
This has been, quite the lengthy discussion.
Yeah.
But you know what? I had a lot of fun discussing this. Like, they're fantastic little machines. Like, yeah, we shat on a couple of them, but they're still pretty damn good. They're pretty damn neat, and they're full of nostalgia, and they look neat, and I love looking at them on my shelves.
Do you really think we would have talked for almost over 4 hours about these things if they weren't at least the slightest bit interesting?
Yeah, what turned into what was supposed to be a hour-and-a-half episode turned into over 4 hours.
Yeah.
So I apologize for the length, but hopefully you found something entertaining.
Yeah, just like we probably heard some games you didn't hear about. Hopefully our opinions sway you one way or the other. You just check out some old stuff.
Yeah. I'm going to be checking out my Sega now. I'm more hyped to actually check it out. Give it a proper look through.
I'm going to play more Monster Hunter. This is not a surprise. But I think that's all I've got.
That's all you got? Okay,
Yeah.
that's all I got, I think. Guys, thank you so much for listening. Drop us a follow on Twitter. Give us some feedback. We love feedback. Depending on your podcast service of choice, leave a review. Don't know what they really do, but I know we're supposed to be asking for them. All the big guys do. So, yeah, drop us a follow on Twitter or Instagram. Optional Boss PC. And leave us a review if you're so inclined. And we hope to see you on the next episode where we should be talking, no guarantees, but the Game Awards.
Ooh, who's gonna take it all?
Doesn't matter because it's a stupid little title. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everybody.